Kia ora and welcome to Tarmac. I'm Dave.
I'm Matthew, and this behind us is quite a special one because this particular car here, well, not this exact one, but it is the very first electric vehicle from Toyota.
Yes, you're right. It's the bZ4X. It may be an unfamiliar name, but it's very familiar to drive. Come, let's take a look at this. Now, according to Toyota, the bZ4X is basically the future of a vision into their future of where they're going, and that actually begins with the nameplate itself. So the B stands for beyond, the Z stands for zero emissions, the 4 stands for actually the size of the vehicle, and the X means basically a crossover, so X for crossover, and that's what this vehicle is. In New Zealand, we're bringing in 2 models of it. We've got the Pure and we've got the Motion. The Pure is the 2-wheel drive, the Motion is this one, which is the all-wheel drive, and this one comes with all the specs, all the bells, all the whistles, and actually quite a lot of internal noises stuff that when you're driving you'll hear about anyway. And it is all electric, but in the modern size of things, look at it, it's very, very modern. It's been jointly made with Subaru, so there's a lot of co-development going on, and underneath it all is an eTNGA platform, which they both share, so it's very much an EV based platform. But the front here, what we've got is like no grille, because so you can see it's a grille-less front, and the lights here, we've got like four lights here that basically have 4 eyeballs. I don't even know what that means, but the future is 4 eyeballs basically. And look at these DRLs here, and that's where your turning signals are. You've got some vents down here which basically helps with the airflow down these wheels, or down the side of these wheels. And being as this is the Motion, this comes with 20 inches, whereas the Pure comes with 18s. Moving as you come down here, you've got the BEV sign, and also I don't know what this is, an earth and sea and sky sort of look here. These sort of protective wheel arches, making sure that you can go off-road, and this does have an X mode, meaning that you can go off-road to a certain degree. It's got a lovely flowing roof line. Up the top here you've got a split sunroof, or a split panoramic roof. I would expect if the door handles to be recessed, but they're not, and you've got some more protective sills down here that come all the way back down to this sort of roof line that brings you right round to the rear. So actually let's go there. Now if you want to know if well, actually from a distance which vehicle you've got, the Pure is basically got a very recessed roofline spoiler, and the Motion has got these 2 big fangs sticking out here. So there you go, from a distance you can tell that brings that down to another nice little elevated spoiler. Look at this full width light bar. You've got the bZ4X sign, you've also got the all-wheel drive sign, so it does have 2 motors, and a little bit more of protective sort of stuff down the bottom here. When you open up the boot, it's unfortunately not a kicker tailgate, so you don't have to do this. You get 441 litres of boot space or trunk space, and also another little area under here to hide your other goodies or stuff that you want to do. There's also a nice JBL beastie speaker in the back here to make sure that your sounds are all good, and you know, keeping your beats going well. Let's look and see what powers this. Now behind this flap gives you access to the 71.4 kilowatt hour battery, which in the 2-wheel drive gives you 535 kilometers of range, or in this one 435. So obviously having the 2 motors and the more power does give you less range. And in terms of power, having the 2 motors gives you 160 kilowatts of power combined and 168 newton meters of torque per motor, which in basically acceleration terms means you'll get 7.5 in the 2-wheel drive, or 6.9 0 to 100 in seconds. So this is the more rapid one, and will basically mean that you'll run out of juice that little bit more. But speaking of things that run out of juice, Matthew's inside and he'll show you what's going on there.
The funny thing is, it sounds like Dave actually needs a recharge because he got the numbers the wrong way around, because this Motion model has 485 kilometers of range, and the lower spec Pure one has 535 kilometers of range. Remember the key difference being dual motor versus single motor. Anyway, back to the elephant in the room here. So this is the very first electric vehicle, production electric vehicle from Toyota, and you would imagine that because of that they've sort of tried to make the interior and the controls. They've tried to sort of establish a new order with all of that stuff. But I'm glad to say that it's still a Toyota. They've still kept the sort of familiarity that that brand brings. So it'll help you gladly set the world in motion. Going back to motion, well, these seats actually are really comfortable and allow you to be sort of really sink into them on longer drives and that sort of thing. But at the same time offer plenty of customization, especially for the driver's seat, which is electronic, 10-way adjustable, and you've got 2 memory options as well to add on. Passenger, however, doesn't get any of that. It is traditional controls. But on the plus side, you do have both of these, which are heated and ventilated also. The material, although deceivingly leather looking, is not actually leather. It is a synthetic leather, and in this particular car has been specified in a lighter color. So you can see that the upholstery is very bright to really offset the darker colors on the dashboard, which I think is quite a good idea. Speaking of the dashboard, again, Toyota have gone sort of futuristic with their use of materials. So you can see the fabrics and things are not what you would expect to traditionally find on a dashboard, but they do well. They're soft enough to touch and just offset the black plastic in terms of colors quite well too. This is, yes, it's a novelty for Toyota. It's their first EV, but at the same time it has to do certain things well, and one of those things is be practical, because this is a family SUV. And you'll be glad to know that it does that quite well. You've got generous door bins down the side. You've got 2 cup holders here, a little nook in there, which I've got my sunglasses in. You've got your under armrest space over there. This floating center console with, as you can see, my hand can come through there. And it does actually allow you to tidy up your cables down the bottom. So you've got your 12-volt socket, USB-C adapter, and I believe 2 USB-C adapters. And you can leave your phone charging down here to keep the cables out of sight. Speaking of out of sight, you might wonder where the phone goes. If I push that, that's exactly where the phone fits in. And it's also got a wireless phone charger underneath and a USB-A charger as well for more options there. The center console as well, as I said before, with the familiarity. For those who know the Toyota range, you'll recognize many of these buttons from across the various models that they make, and in particular you'll notice one button that is actually more familiar to those who own the Subaru brand, rather, with the X mode present there for the first time on a Toyota. So that's quite new. Now in the middle you have a 12.3-inch infotainment screen tacked on here, and this is using Toyota's latest infotainment operating system, as you can see there in the lighter sort of configuration. You've got your shortcuts on the right hand side here, your navigation, audio, phone, vehicle, and then your Toyota connections. And then the settings menu. I really want to draw your attention to the vehicle, because once you go into things like your trip information, then you can see what your average sort of kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers has been in terms of consumption. And then if I go back into that, you can set a charging schedule as well, like so, for each day of the week, which is all sort of EV unique features. Something else that's actually unique to this EV, as you can see here, a very sort of descriptive air conditioning control unit. And that is actually not a traditional air conditioning system. Instead, Toyota have gone with a heat pump option, which then conserves a battery and also means that you have to sacrifice a glove box, which is why I didn't cover one earlier. Now you'll notice that there's plenty going on in this sort of driver's area here. And that's thanks to, well, this all new layout that Toyota is employing. And if you see, rather than having the gauge cluster somewhere here, it's actually so far set back from the driver. In a way, it's almost like a head-up display on the windscreen. But in saying that as it is, it allows for you to see the information very easily. But at the same time, if you're sitting back and if you're of a certain height, the top of the steering wheel sort of blocks your view. So it's pretty important that you set this correctly to ensure you have full view of what's ahead on the cluster. Speaking of what's ahead on the cluster, if I go back there, you can see that right now I'm employing the split screen option. So I've got on one side my average consumption, and on the right side I've got my speedo, my charge and power meter, gear, you can see air conditioning, range, battery percentage. There's a lot of stuff going on over there. And if I move down the side, you can see that I can add other elements to it. My adaptive cruise control, audio, trip, and of course Toyota's safety sense as well. You can take a look at what's on offer there: lane departure, blind spot, forward collision warning, parking assist, and the list goes on and on. It's really comprehensively a safe car, which is all the more reassuring when you're driving an EV. Speaking of driving an EV, well, Toyota have done a little bit of work in this sort of steering department here, because the feeling is in a way unfamiliar to what we know of Toyota, but at the same time still familiar in the way the buttons are sort of laid out. But the fact that it's got a sort of more go-karty style steering wheel, which you can then move lower and be more engaged. And speaking of engaged, it's actually made so that it's ever so comfortable in the 9 and 3 position for those sort of more keen drivers. The other thing is that the steering wheel is actually wrapped in pure leather and is heated. And lastly, to cover off one of the new additions here, you can see this sort of little black bar there, and that's actually monitoring me as a driver and seeing where my focus is in terms of whether I'm keeping my eyes on the road or not, and it'll just sort of do things to ensure that my attention remains on the road.
And here at the back of the bZ4X, as you would expect from a family SUV, there's plenty of room, even if you are sitting in a position that would be what was right for Matt. And then here we have plenty of knee room and headroom as well. Although the framing looks a bit weird for this shot that we're doing, because the doors, they don't open as wide as we normally see in cars like this. And also that the sloping line of the roof sort of eats a little bit into the space in here. But once you are inside, there's absolutely no shortage of space, and you get a few sort of convenience features, like the armrest that goes down to reveal 2 cup holders and a place for you to put your phone that can be charged using either of the USB-C ports that you get on the center console. Also in the center console, you get 2 air vents, although there is no control for the temperature, and a flat floor because, of course, the EV powertrain that allows for that, so you get a little bit more room. The experience in here is very airy because of the fact you get this massive sunroof that brings a lot of light into the cabin. That is, of course, helped by the seats as well, which are as comfortable back here as they are up front. The only sort of caveat to the EV powertrain is that, as you can probably see from the shot, there is almost no thigh support for my legs in here, so I'm sure that in longer drives it could become a little bit of a nuisance. But yeah, longer drives is what we're here for, so I think it's about time we take the bZ4X for a short drive.
Now the big thing about this car straight away being the Motion is it is all-wheel drive, and that means that it's got the same sort of pull-away power as probably a hot hatchback actually, which is not bad for a vehicle that weighs around about 2.5 tons.
It's certainly, by adding the battery and the dual motors and all that stuff to what Toyota have done, have certainly added weight to it. But in the same time, and I feel going against the traditional EV formula, they haven't tried to make it, you know, an absolute mammoth, or rather insanely fast in a straight line. They haven't gone and put, you know, 1,000 Newton meters and 500 kilowatts of power out of it. It's got numbers, or rather performance figures, that are reasonable, as well as, in a Toyota way, just enough for what you need.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably not enough for your kids to spill their fizzy drinks in the back, but also enough to give them a little bit of a thrill and go, oh, Daddy's got a hot hatch. But he doesn't. He's got a nice full EV SUV. The thing we touched on earlier is the fact of how familiar it is, and it does drive very much like a Toyota. It feels, everything sort of seems to be, even though it is their sort of futuristic look, but it's somebody that, if somebody had a Toyota before, would pretty much be able to navigate around things. The screen's not too complex, the drive is good, it's got a big stop button, so old people like me can actually push the button and away it goes. So it is very familiar in that way.
And the interesting thing is, you speak of familiarity, but it's, for us in the motor industry, we know both the Toyota and the Lexus brands, and something like this bZ4X is almost, in a way, blurring the lines between the two of them, because for someone like me, when I look at certain details like the headlights or like the gear lever and all of that stuff, I start to see a little bit of Lexus inspiration there, which normally you wouldn't see in Toyota products. And at this price point, the bZ4X is something like, in this motion trim, is about $80,000, which is quite pricey for a Toyota. And that's when they start to add more luxury to it, and that's when you start to get that sort of almost fusion with the Lexus territory, if you like.
Also, there is the crossover, and forgive me on this, because of the X-Drive and things like that, the crossover to the Subaru brand as well. So you could be mistaken when you jump into either of them, trying to work out which one's which, apart from the fact that obviously, well, when you're in the Subaru version, you have a different sort of shaped steering wheel and obviously the Subaru badge, but very much the layout is very much shared, and just a few different things like paddles and things like that, so it does vary from there. The other thing I wanted to point out is the fact of this vehicle is in what they call dynamic blue. I think it's a really good color, contrasts very well with the black, but also the size. So this is quite a large SUV, even though it doesn't look it. It hides it very well. 4.96 or something like that in length, 1.65 in height. So it is, if you're going to put it into in parking mall spots, it is actually going to take up quite a lot, although you will be able to see over the top. Even I can do that.
That's right. It's a sizable car, and in some respects it is a sizable car when you're next to it, but then you take it out onto the road and you're not even sort of, you know, a fraction of larger things like a Land Cruiser or a Land Cruiser Prado or something. So in a way they have done it, you know, given you plenty of space in here in the boot, while still maintaining a more compact SUV size, which makes it then easier to navigate around mall car parks, as Dave said, and on the road as well, or in traffic.
Oh, the other thing on navigation, I don't know if Matthew touched on it because I was asleep at that point, but the reversing camera has a sort of transparent thing, so when you're reversing you can see what's going on underneath, which again goes in for that all-terrain sort of X mode thing. So if you're going to go over some pretty semi-gnarly stuff, you'll be able to see that there's what's going on below you, or if anyone's below you, sort of thing. And the other thing is, in the difference between this and the Subaru counterpart, I am reliably informed by the engineer or head engineer that this has a softer suspension, and you can feel that slightly when you're going into corners. So this is not as abrupt in its cornering or its rebound when you're driving as, say, the Subaru version, although it does corner quite nicely.
In typical EV fashion, it's got its weight down low with the battery sitting below the car body, and all of that helps add the dual motors into the mix, and then you've got, you know, traction going around all four wheels, and it gives, even though the power figures are not that high, you still get an engaging enough drive with the system and with the instant torque of the electric motors.
As far as seating and visibility goes, you do sit quite low, so smaller people like me, actually this one's all right for me, but I have heard of smaller people that are struggling to see over the top and get the whole visibility. But I actually find that visibility all round is pretty good, even with these little quarter panels and things like that. Out the back's probably a little bit limited, but on the whole, I think the seat adjustment's great. I think the whole center console, or sorry, center sort of instrument cluster thing, it sort of feels cocooned around me. There's everything directed towards me, as opposed to a shared screen on some other EVs which I get to share with my passenger. I get this is sort of more me.
And the other interesting thing, as I touched upon earlier as well, is that whole sort of isolation of the driver unit means that when they've pushed the screen that far out, the steering wheel position then needs to be set in sort of, you have to focus on setting it right, because otherwise then the top of the steering wheel blocks off your view of the instrument cluster, which is something unique, but at the same time then means that what Toyota have done have made the steering wheel a little bit smaller, made it, you know, more comfortable to grip, and almost in a way, how would I say, pushing you to push this car while around corners and make it a more engaging drive simply by working on the steering feel.
Hopefully that makes sense. There is a little bit of wind noise, particularly from the driver's mirror, and also the tyres do offer a fair amount of road noise. It's not, I think it's probably more the fact that it's an EV, so like an ICE engine, you probably wouldn't hear that, but the stereo system's strong enough to drown that all out, and the drive is free enough to make you, again, not worry about that.
Absolutely. I was just about to say, Dave's sound problem can be totally sort of annihilated by just dialing up the volume on that JBL sound system, and you will have noticed the size of the subwoofer it's got in the back means that it can really crank out your tunes at, I don't know, almost sort of jarring levels of noise.
Last but not least, the battery power or battery range itself. I know this is a talking point because all EVs do. The recorded, or the figures that they spout in their sort of literature is not quite what you'll get when you're sitting in the vehicle. I've been picking up roughly about 100 kilometers less than what they're advertised as, and then around town, the numbers are really good. They're bang on. What you see on the screen is essentially what you get. But I've also done a long run in the two-wheel drive, and that is quite a big difference when you're going along the motorway at 100, just over 100 kilometers per hour. So there you have it, the new Toyota bZ4X. It is a bit of a mouthful when it comes to the name, but it's actually all makes sense. It's a full EV that does take a lot of familiar sort of takings from the Toyota group, but also does show it into the future. So as far as the driver goes, it does give you that sense of futuristic, I don't know, that step into the future, but without scaring me. I know what's going on, and I'm quite happy with it. There are some bits that are not as modern, not as luxurious as you would want, but then this is the Toyota, not the Lexus.
And the interesting thing is, this is, as I said before, the first electric vehicle from Toyota, but the brand's appeal is so strong that I think before it even officially launched, last month in New Zealand, it was the third best-selling EV on the market. So, there you go.
They must be onto something. Anyway, you're onto something as well. So make sure you stay tuned and hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next one. See you.